You're watching a nature documentary. An orca breaches the surface, calls out to its pod, and disappears back into the deep. It looks intelligent. It looks like it knows something. But what if it actually does? What if one day a team of scientists finally cracks the code, and for the first time in human history, you could ask an orca a question and get an answer back? Not a trained response, not a trick for a marine park crowd, a real answer from a real mind on the other side of the conversation. This isn't science fiction any more than the internet was science fiction in 1950. Researchers are already mapping orca vocalizations, tracking dialects between pods, and building AI models that can spot patterns no human ear would ever catch. The technology to translate is getting closer every year. So let's actually imagine it happening. Let's play this out. Picture the moment it finally works, not a single scientist in a lab, a whole team watching a screen as a wild orca's clicks and whistles turn into words for the first time. What would they even ask first? Probably something simple, something safe. There are salmon here. Follow me. This is my calf. Basic functional communication, the kind we already suspect orcas are capable of. That part wouldn't shock anyone. The real test would come next. Researchers would start asking questions that require something more than instinct, something closer to thought. What happened yesterday? Do you remember your grandmother? Do you understand that humans are different from you? If an orca could answer that last question, the entire conversation changes, because now you're not just decoding sound. You're talking to a mind that understands there's another mind on the other end. Think about what that would actually look like in practice. A marine biologist, headset on, boat idling 100 feet offshore, asking a translated question into a speaker lowered into the water, and waiting, and getting something back that makes sense. That's not a documentary voiceover anymore. That's an interview. And once the first successful exchange happens, it wouldn't stay quiet for long. Picture the headlines. Picture a marine biologist sitting in front of a camera trying to explain to the entire world that an orca just answered a question correctly 3 times in a row with no possible way to fake it. Governments would want in, universities would want funding, and somewhere, an orca that's never asked for any of this attention would suddenly become the most famous individual on the planet. Now stretch the idea further. Orcas can live 60, 70, even 90 years. A single elder in a pod could be carrying nearly a century of memory. Traditional hunting grounds, migration routes that shifted after a new shipping lane opened, changes in the water they've noticed decades before any research vessel showed up to measure it. Ask that elder the right question, and you're not talking to an animal anymore. You're accessing an oral history of the ocean, something we've never had access to in any form, ever. Here's where it gets genuinely strange. What if orcas have their own history, not written down anywhere, but passed on, generation to generation, the way stories were told around fires long before anyone invented paper? Imagine asking a pod through a translator, "How long have your people known about humans?" And picture actually getting an answer. Maybe they have a name for themselves. Maybe they have a name for us. Maybe it's something as simple as the land ones, passed down for longer than anyone alive today has existed. And maybe the answer to that first question isn't comforting at all. Maybe it's something closer to, "We have known about you for many generations." Not as a threat, just a fact. Which means the entire time humans have been studying orcas, wondering what's going on behind those eyes, the orcas may have been studying us right back. That single sentence flips the whole relationship. You stop being the observer. You become the subject. Once real two-way communication exists, the questions people ask wouldn't stay comfortable for long. Somebody, somewhere, would eventually ask the question everyone's been avoiding. Researchers could sit down, so to speak, with an orca currently living in a marine park and simply ask it directly. Do you understand why you're here? Do you want to go home? What do you need to be happy? No more interpreting behavior from a distance. No more guessing based on repetitive swimming patterns or stress hormones in a blood sample. The animal tells you, in its own words, translated but unfiltered. That single conversation could end a decades-long ethical debate in an afternoon. Not because activists finally won an argument, but because the subject of the argument spoke up for itself. And here's where things get genuinely interesting. Once an orca can say yes or no, the entire model of a marine park could flip overnight. No more permanent residents, no more tanks as a life sentence. Instead, picture something closer to a guest booking. An orca swims up to a dock, greets its regular translator with a familiar click pattern, and agrees to spend the afternoon at a nearby aquarium, answering questions from a crowd of visitors through a live translated feed. Kids ask what its favorite food is. It answers. Someone asks if it's ever been scared of a boat. It answers that too. At the end of the visit, it's paid, so to speak, in a bucket of fresh salmon, and it swims back out to open water whenever it wants to leave because the door was never locked in the first place. Some orcas might do this constantly, almost like a career. Regulars on the interspecies talk show circuit, comfortable in front of a crowd, clearly enjoying the attention and the fish. Others might only show up once, curious enough to try it, and never volunteer again. Consent, translated in real time, would finally make that distinction possible. And it wouldn't stop at aquariums. Picture an orca that's spent decades hearing engines pass overhead, asking through its translator what's actually up there. What does land look like? What do trees feel like? What's a truck? Now picture someone actually taking that request seriously. A specially built tank on a flatbed truck, filled and aerated, an orca lifted gently aboard for a short supervised trip along the coast, just to see the world from a different angle for an afternoon. A guide riding alongside, headset on, fielding an endless stream of questions the entire drive. What's that sound? Why is the ground moving? What are those tall things? Do you sleep standing up like that? The orca, wide-eyed at an actual forest for the first time, asking better questions than most tourists would. It sounds almost funny to imagine. An orca on a road trip, asking a human tour guide to slow down so it can look at a mountain. But if consent and curiosity are real on both sides, that's not exploitation. That's just tourism, running in a direction nobody expected. And it wouldn't stop at captivity. Once you can ask, "What do you need?" you can ask almost anything. Governments and coastal communities could, in theory, sit down with pods the same way they'd sit down with any group whose home they're operating in. Where can ships travel without cutting through a hunting ground? Where fishing should be limited? Which waters need to stay quiet? It sounds strange to say out loud. Negotiating with whales. But if there's genuine understanding on both sides, it's not that different from any other negotiation between two parties who both have something to lose. Imagine what that meeting would actually look like. Not a boardroom. A boat, anchored in open water, laptops and hydrophones instead of contracts and pens. A coastal government representative on one side. A translator device humming quietly on the other. And somewhere beneath the surface, a pod deciding whether they trust the deal being offered. It might even become a job. A real one. Marine translator. Interspecies liaison. Someone who spends their career going back and forth between fishing councils and orca pods, making sure both sides actually understood what they agreed to. Some of these orcas might do this willingly, curious about the strange, loud, tool-obsessed species that's been sharing their ocean the whole time. Others might need convincing, the same way any group needs convincing before it trusts an outsider. There's an even bigger question waiting underneath all of this. Do orcas understand death? Imagine asking, gently, through a translator, "Do you remember orcas who have died? Do you know that you will die someday?" If the answer comes back as something more than instinctive avoidance, if there's genuine grief, memory, or awareness in the response, that's not just a marine biology headline anymore. That's a question for philosophers, for religious scholars, for anyone who's ever tried to define what separates a person from an animal. Because if an orca can grieve, remember, and understand its own mortality, the line we've drawn between human and animal gets a lot blurrier than most people are comfortable with. Here's the part almost nobody thinks about. This conversation wouldn't be one-directional. If orcas can answer questions, they can ask them too. Picture it. An orca, mid-conversation with a research team, turning the question around. Why do you keep some of us in pools? Why do your ships cross through our hunting grounds? Why is the water always so loud now? What is a human exactly? Try answering that last one honestly to something that's just as intelligent as you, but has never once needed a hand, a tool, or a written language to survive and thrive for millions of years. You'd have to explain cities, fishing fleets, engines, plastic, sonar. All the things that seemed completely normal 5 minutes ago suddenly need justifying to something that never asked for any of it. That's the twist nobody sees coming. We assume first contact with a truly different mind means we'll be the ones asking all the questions. But the moment communication becomes real and mutual, you lose the ability to stay comfortably in the observer's seat. Now, zoom out even further. Orcas never built a single tool out of metal, never lit a fire, never wrote a word down. By every physical measure we usually use, no cities, no writing, no visible technology, they'd fail the test for civilization completely. But what if that test was always the wrong one? Humans built civilization around hands, fire, and physical materials, because that's what our environment gave us to work with. Orcas got none of that. What they got instead was decades of lifespan, tight social bonds, and minds built for memory and cooperation. So instead of building their world out of stone and metal, they might have built it entirely out of memory. Passed mind to mind, generation to generation, no blueprints, no permanent record except the ones carried inside another living orca. If that's true, their civilization isn't missing. It's just invisible to anyone only looking for buildings. Think about how strange that would be to actually witness a pod of orcas that, in their own way, has an entire body of law, rules about where you hunt, rules about how you treat a calf that isn't yours, rules about what happens when two pods cross paths in contested water. None of it written anywhere, all of it carried, whole, inside the memory of every adult in the group, taught the same way a parent teaches a child to walk. And that changes what finding intelligent life might actually mean, even right here on Earth. We've spent decades pointing telescopes at the sky, looking for a signal from somewhere else, when there may be another form of intelligence already living in our oceans, one we've been swimming past for generations without ever fully listening. If two-way communication with orcas ever becomes real, it wouldn't just be a marine biology milestone. It would force an uncomfortable reset on how humans define intelligence, consciousness, and even personhood. Not does it use tools, not does it build cities, just is there someone in there? And once you can no longer avoid that question, everything about how we treat the ocean and everything living in it starts to look different. So next time you catch a clip of an orca breaching, calling out across open water, ask yourself something. What if it already understands more about you than you've ever understood about it? And what if the only thing standing between us and finding out isn't their intelligence at all? It's ours.